By far, the rarest thing in today's NBA game is a legit center, like a real legit center. And especially a center with real low post scoring skills. However, in today's NBA, it's rare enough to find a real deal legit center. And when it comes to real deal legit centers in the NBA, one of those few guys on that list has to be DeAndre Jordan. He is, in every sense of the word, a legit NBA center. Hey, when I look at a guy like DeAndre Jordan, I think it has to be said by me is that, I root for guys like DeAndre Jordan. Here's a guy that was once a second round pick out of, I believe, Texas A&M, who didn't have anything handed to him, had to work and work and work and develop and hone his craft and prove people wrong and prove himself and prove everything to the league. And over a period of time, he did. He stuck with it. He put the work in. And now you're talking about a guy that was once a second round pick to where when he signed his first big money, so to speak, extension with the Clippers, a lot of people questioned it and kind of scoffed at it. To now here's a guy that has led the NBA 3 straight seasons in field goal percentage. He's led the league in rebounds per game for 2 straight years. An elite low post defender, an elite shot blocker, a guy with some athleticism where he can defend in pick and roll situations, some at least, anyways, and an elite low post defender. This is a guy that realized what he was and who he could be and decided to be the best of what he could be and worked hard to try and make a name for himself in the league. And ultimately, DeAndre Jordan has. You're talking about a guy that was third team All NBA, I believe, this year, first team All NBA defensive team. From a second round pick to that's a hell of a thing. And, that was a organization with so many bad, terrible draft picks throughout its history, like the Los Angeles Clippers, to get a guy like a DeAndre Jordan in the second round and be able to keep him in the fold that many years and have him develop into this type of potentially frontline defensive player in the NBA, is really good. And a pleasant surprise, surely. And again, like I said, I root for guys like DeAndre Jordan that work hard like this. And, the way DeAndre Jordan always has come across to me, he's a guy that has worked hard, at least on certain parts of his game. I've always felt that he plays hard. I always felt like he was a guy that was a really good or at least decent locker room presence to a degree, and also a guy that was a bit of a leader on the floor. And you could see that reflected in the Clippers, even though it was Chris Paul and Blake Griffin's team. You could see at times where Doc Rivers would turn to DeAndre Jordan kind of as the de facto captain or leader of the team. Again, a guy that didn't have anything handed to him. He had to go out there and get it. He had to go out there and make it, and that's what he did. Now, with this free agency period, even though I viewed LaMarcus Aldridge as the biggest name that was legitimately available, like actually likely to switch teams, one of the biggest names on the market was DeAndre Jordan as well. And I ultimately assumed when all was said and done that he was going to leave the Los Angeles Clippers for a few reasons. Number one, there's been a lot of reports, especially over the past year, of a shaky relationship between him and Chris Paul. And part of that, I think, comes from DeAndre Jordan's horrible free throw shooting and maybe Chris Paul venting frustrations because he doesn't feel like that he works on it nearly as hard as he should. Maybe DeAndre Jordan feels like Chris Paul and Blake Griffin get too much attention for what the Clippers have been the past few years, and DeAndre Jordan would like some of that attention himself. Where there's smoke, there's fire, and as many reports as there been, you got to believe something is true, and I could understand where something is true. And maybe with Chris Paul, it's kind of like us as fans and, even NBA front offices and in other sports as well. Sometimes we focus too much on what players can't do or focus on their weaknesses, and we don't focus enough on the positives that they bring to the table and the good things that they do. And I think that's fair to say. We are human beings, and as a result, we are very negative creatures by nature. There's no question about that. So it's easier to focus on the negative. It's harder to focus on the positives. So while we could talk about the fact that DeAndre Jordan is a limited low-post offensive weapon, for sure, and a horrendous, historically all-time bad free throw shooter, it's easy to focus on this stuff. It's fun to knock him for that. This is a guy that's a legit defender and a legit low-post defender, a great shot blocker, an elite shot blocker in today's NBA standards, and arguably the best rebounder in all of the NBA. And from an offensive standpoint, efficient when he does get the ball in his hands. And a somewhat unselfish player, at least the way he's presented himself. over the past several seasons. We don't focus enough on those positives. And maybe he left the Clippers in part, I feel too, and you've seen some reports about this, that he wants to be a bigger part of the offense. Maybe at times he felt like because Chris Paul is a ball-dominant guard and Blake Griffin is going to be a ball-dominant forward, that he felt he could bring more to the table with the fact that he shot over 70% from the field this past season. Maybe he feels with more opportunities he could be an even bigger part of the offense, and he's a guy that wants to be a bigger part of the offense. And frankly, as long as he was playing with the Clippers, he was never going to be that. So he had to go somewhere else to where he didn't have that reputation in place, where there wasn't that certain established hierarchy in terms of CP3 and Blake Griffin 1A, 1B. And if he wanted to be a bigger part of the offense, he was going to have to do that. And then he left the Clippers because, he maybe wanted to go back home to Texas, is where he went to college. Maybe there was a lot of appeal there to go back to Texas, on top of the fact that Texas doesn't have a state income tax. And I talk about this so often with certain guys where they sign in free agency. That's a factor because that money means more in certain places as opposed to others. So when you look at those different things, combined with the fact that when you look at the Clippers from DeAndre Jordan's standpoint, is based off of where they were in a salary cap situation, especially if they re-signed him to a max contract, it was really going to hamper this organization's financial flexibility going forward. And if they can't even get to the Western Conference Finals with their current construction, how are they going to get any better, and how are things going to improve to a different level? So, it's not that surprising that DeAndre Jordan ultimately left. And from the standpoint of the Dallas Mavericks, I'm not that surprised that they would be going after him. You look at Tyson Chandler, and he was an important player for them over the years at different times when he was there. But this was a guy that was starting to decline, and also a guy that had come straight out of high school in his early 30s that has the NBA body and wear and tear of a guy in his late 30s, like 36, 37 years old, who isn't quite the rebounder, defender, or shot blocker that he once was. And you look at DeAndre Jordan and you see the fact that he's better at what he does than Tyson Chandler was ever at what he does. And DeAndre Jordan's not even 27 yet, whereas Chandler's in his early 30s and getting old in a hurry. And you look at the fact that the Mavericks are going to be a team in transition with Dirk being 37. At some point in time, it's not going to be Dirk's team anymore. And honestly, it might not even be Dirk's team anymore. He's just the face of that franchise. You were going to need to find a star type of player. You needed to be able to retool on the fly while at the same time not having to just totally rebuild through the draft. And when you get a guy like this available, you have to go out there and pursue him because it can make a statement that the Dallas Mavericks are still a team to take seriously with an owner in Mark Cuban that is to be taken seriously. So I understand the move. But here's my problem with it. Is a problem with it for the Dallas Mavericks in terms of DeAndre Jordan and his fit. Dirk is 37. So you're going there to play alongside a guy, Hall of Famer, great player, NBA champion, but a guy who's on the downside of his career. And all the while, you're going into a situation where the face of the franchise is 37 now, and you don't have a point guard. Now, maybe the Dallas Mavericks will bring in somebody like a Jeremy Lin, who, for all the Lin sanity and all the overhype, sometimes gets forgotten that he is at least a solid NBA point guard. Not a star, not a superstar, certainly, but, a solid NBA point guard. And even if that's the case, though, you're DeAndre Jordan. You're going from playing with one of the very best point guards and very best players in all of the NBA in Chris Paul, a guy who created so many opportunities for you with the way he ran the offense, most notably off of the lobs and the alley-oops. Where's the point guard in Dallas? I mean, if you're DeAndre Jordan, you might think very highly of yourself, but you're going from playing with CP3 to playing with another point guard that's not CP3 and not anywhere close to CP3. If you think things are going to get easier for you in Dallas, you are sorely mistaken. And if you think you're going to become a bigger part of the offense with absolutely no offensive skill and no point guard like Chris Paul to open up opportunities for you, you're insane. And all the while, this is also a Mavericks team that lacks an elite perimeter player or an elite player at all, frankly. He gave big money to Chandler Parsons last offseason. He had some injury problems for Dallas, but, he's not an elite player. They've agreed to terms at least with Wesley Matthews, but this is a guy in Portland at 28 coming off of a torn Achilles who's a solid two-way player in the NBA, but most certainly not an elite one. When you look at it from DeAndre Jordan's standpoint, he's going to play with a couple of pretty good players, but none of them you would classify as stars or superstars at this stage of their careers for different reasons. Dirk, because he's on the downside. Chandler Parsons and Wesley Matthews have never been that guy. So no elite player. And in the case of LA, he had both Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. He had two elite players to play around and play with. He doesn't have that here in Dallas. And he doesn't have somebody that's a superstar out on the perimeter like he did in LA with Chris Paul, and more with Blake Griffin stretching out his game to become a more effective mid-range guy. The amount of opportunities that DeAndre Jordan's going to have might increase in Dallas, but it's going to be even more difficult for him. I'm not sure that this is a great situation for him. And then, from the Dallas Mavericks standpoint, I think it's questionable because you're giving max money to, frankly, a one-dimensional player. Now, he's elite at that one dimension. And in some ways, that's enough for a lot of people nowadays to justify giving somebody a max contract because they are elite at one-dimensional, similar to how you would for a guy that would be elite on offense and horrible on defense. Okay, I understand that. And you look at guys like, let's say, Dwight Howard. He's elite, supposedly, at one dimension, which is on the defensive end. So as a result, he gets max money. So why can't DeAndre Jordan when he's younger? But again, you are giving max money to a one-dimensional player. And as a result, you're giving $20 million to DeAndre Jordan to be a better version and younger version of Tyson Chandler, who took $13 million a year to sign with the Phoenix Suns. Is the difference between DeAndre Jordan and Tyson Chandler that great where you can make a $7 million per year justification? I don't know where this makes the most business sense from a Mark Cuban type of standpoint. For a guy that's supposed to be such a great businessman, I don't think this is very good business. And while DeAndre Jordan won't make this contract look like a bust or horrible signing because he will be great at what he does, it's part of the problem to me of paying borderline stars, alpha male type of money. Guys like LeBron James, Steph Curry, James Harden, Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis. These are the types of guys that you should be paying max money to. The best, the creme de la creme. DeAndre Jordan is a borderline all-star because of the fact that he's elite at one dimension. And you're paying him like he's an alpha dog. That's a mistake. And furthermore, you hear all the times talking about with the NBA different things. Anybody can play in the first three quarters in the NBA, but only certain players can play in the fourth quarter. Anybody can start a game, but it's all about who finishes. Anybody can play the first 43 minutes, but the games are won and lost in the last 5 minutes. Well, when you're looking at DeAndre Jordan, it does come down to the free throw shooting and the fact that he's a career, 40-something% free throw shooter. His horrible free throw shooting basically takes him off the floor for the majority of the fourth quarter. So not only are you paying max money to a one-dimensional defensive player, you're paying max money, alpha male type of money, to a borderline star that is a one-dimensional player, and that one dimension is defense, whereas free throw shooting is so horrible and so bad that you basically have to, until they change the rules with the hack a Shaq, hack a Dwight, hack a DeAndre rule, are going to have to take him off of the floor because a lot of teams are going to sit there in the fourth quarter and continue to follow him and put his ass on the free throw line, which, while it may run the risk of taking them out of their rhythm, like you saw at one point in time in the playoffs in the Houston series with the Clippers, it could also take the Mavericks out of their rhythm because it's slowing the game down, and a guy like DeAndre Jordan is going to make them incredibly offensive and efficient, especially with this horrible free throw shooting. So if teams know that they can hack this guy at any point in time, especially in the fourth quarter until the 2-minute mark or whatever it is, then you're basically paying a guy max money to sit the bench most of the fourth quarter when the games are really won and lost. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And furthermore, what's his value offensively without Chris Paul and Blake Griffin? He's going to be playing with Wesley Matthews and Chandler Parsons and an aging Dirk Nowitzki. He wants to be a bigger part of the offense. Well, maybe he should work on his offensive game because he's not going to have those same lob and putback opportunities open to him as easily as they were in LA. And he doesn't have Chris Paul and Blake Griffin to command the majority, the lion's share of opposing defense's attentions. And again, I don't understand this because he wants to be a bigger part of the offense. Well, frankly, at least short term, he's going to be either the number 3 or number 4 option, you would think, offensively behind Dirk Nowitzki and Chandler Parsons and Wesley Matthews. I really don't get this deal. You're paying a max money to a one-dimensional elite defender whose horrible free throw shooting will keep him off of the floor most times for the majority of the fourth quarter, which is the most important time of a game in the NBA, where games are won and lost, which is why you should be paying certain guys the alpha dog money, because those are the guys that win you those games in those situations. DeAndre Jordan's not going to. If anything, he's going to lose you games in those situations. Coming from a situation where he's not playing with an elite point guard, Chris Paul, or an elite power forward like Blake Griffin, to where he's still a number 3 or number 4 option behind Dirk and Parsons and Matthews. Now, again, part of this could have been that he wanted to take this deal because he just wanted to get it out of LA. He couldn't stand Chris Paul. Maybe he just wanted to change the scenery. He thought that signing a shorter deal meant he could hit the free agent market earlier when he's 30 years old, and that could make some sense too. And he could go back home to Texas, maybe where he feels happier, more comfortable, and all the while keep more of his money. And again, that makes sense too. But from a purely on-the-floor basketball standpoint, this deal doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, my opinion, from DeAndre Jordan's standpoint. I most certainly don't think it's all that great of a move for the Dallas Mavericks. Now, this is not a deal, again, I'm going to emphasize, where I'm going to sit there and poon it and talk shit about it all the time, because DeAndre Jordan is so good at what he does do well that you're going to forget about the fact that he's getting paid max money to be a one-dimensional player. So he's not going to be a bust signing, I wouldn't envision, unless he has unforeseen injury problems the next 3-4 years. You know, he's going to be a guy that people don't think about that. And when the salary cap does explode, you know, you're going to look at his $20 million a year and you're going to say, well, that's not really that bad, because this asshole who's not half the guy that DeAndre Jordan is just got 18, 19, 20 million a year to play the same position. But basing it off of comparison sakes alone doesn't necessarily mean that this is still a good deal. It's a good deal financially and flexibility-wise for DeAndre Jordan. I will agree with that. Basketball situation-wise, not so much. From the Dallas Mavericks, I don't think it was a great business decision. And most importantly of all, I don't think it was the most well-thought-out basketball decision either.